Welcome to the new school year. My name is Janet Gorton. I'm the Director of English Learner Programs. I'm going to spend a few minutes sharing with you information that will help you best serve your English learner students and their families. We recognize that communication with parents is essential to the educational process for all students, and in Norman Public Schools, we're committed to make every reasonable effort to provide language services and supports in order to communicate with parents who possess a limited English proficiency. Sometimes we're able to facilitate a meeting using an interpreter. The role of that interpreter is to serve as a neutral conduit who literally shares in the target language what has been stated in English. Then they can also interpret back into English questions that are asked by families for the school staff to answer. If you know you have an upcoming meeting, there is a form that you can fill out to request an interpreter. I'm going to quickly show you how to access it. On the Norman Public Schools webpage, up at user options, you can go to sign in, use your regular login information. And once you do that, it will add a tile up at the top that says staff portal. Click on that, go to the left where you see quick links, open that up, scroll down, and you'll find a request an interpreter link. This takes you to a Google form where you can enter your site, what language you need, when the meeting is requested to be held, etc. And my office will do its best to find someone who can help facilitate that conversation with the family. If we are unable to do that, or you have an emergency and need to get a hold of a family quickly, we also have a phone interpreter service that's available 24/7 in hundreds of languages. You can ask your site principal, secretary, or EL staff for contact information, and they'll be happy to share that with you for how you access that. When you're meeting with a family and an interpreter in person, it's really important that you speak to the parents as the audience, not the interpreter. So instead of saying things like, tell them that, instead, just say it to the family and the interpreter will just share your words. It's important to pause frequently so the interpreter has a chance to share the information in the target language and speak with concise language, so we don't go on and on and on. Sometimes speaking in bullet points helps make the messaging more exact and clear, and it's important when you use documents to do the same thing. Make sure that they're as simplified as they can be. Sometimes we can't always do that, but it does aid in communication. Another great communication tool for written language is through Google Doc. So I have a Google Doc opened here. If you go to Tools, you go to Translate Document, you have to change the name. So I usually just insert the language that I'm changing it into. Then there's a drop-down menu that has a lot of languages on it. I'll choose Spanish. Click Translate, and it will change your document into the language you've requested. It is not perfect, but it certainly will help facilitate meaning. You can also use text from some kind of website and insert it in a Google Doc and use this tool. Occasionally, it didn't do it here, but occasionally it may take a street name and translate it. So I would go back and manually undo that part. So it's always good to kind of scan the document once it's done, but this does help with relaying information to families. School Status is another great tool that we can use. I've got it pulled up here, and I know that many of you use this. This is my student. So I can type a message like welcome back. And then I can pick again a language from a drop-down menu. I'll just do German because it's right here. And then you send it to the contact and it will translate the language. They can do that as well, and you can translate it back into English. So it's a useful tool. I know lots of sites and lots of teachers use this successfully. I also know there are other apps that have similar messaging capabilities like Remind. So what you use, if it has that feature, that is wonderful. I use School Status a lot, and it seems to be pretty valuable. An Infinite Campus, on a student's demographic page at the top, there can be lots of different symbols. One of them is Family Needs Language Assistance. That will give you an idea that there may be some communication needs if you reach out to a family. So what happens at the beginning of the year with the English Learner Program? It all starts with the Home Language Survey, which is a form completed by all kindergarten and new students to the district. It has 3 questions that are asked about language background and current language use. And if any one of those languages, any one of those questions has a language other than English as an answer, then we are required to screen that student with an approved screener within the first 30 calendar days at the beginning of the year. Later in the year, we're down to just 14 days that we have to screen the student, see if they meet the criteria of being an English learner, and then notifying the parent of that designation and what kind of supports that we will put in place to support the student both academically and in their English language development. We are required for all of our English learners to develop an ELAP, very similar to an IEP. It's called an English Language Academic Plan. And in that plan, we include classroom modifications, testing accommodations, learning goals. It has their most recent data from their English language proficiency test and can also give information about where their language proficiency is now and how we want it to grow. This is something that if you have an English learner in your classroom, you have access to all of this information through your Elevation dashboard, which I will mention in a moment again. And all of these things are run by federal and state law. So language and content are really related. As students move up the levels of grade level, it becomes so much more complex, both in the content and then in the language. If a student comes to us as an 8th grader, it's going to show greater gaps in the language and the content for them, and it may be much more difficult versus if they join us as a 1st grader. So lots of supports are needed to support these students in gaining access to learning, which is our goal. There are many things that you all do on a regular basis that are great for learning for all students. For our English learners, these are some of the critical ones that will really help them. So first of all, modeling, showing what they need to do, giving them an idea of concrete expectations for the end product. Using repetitive language is really important. That's how we acquire vocabulary over time as a learner of any language, is by the input of repetitive language, both in hearing and then later on in production. We want to give really clear directions, both oral and written. And it's really important to not only give the oral instructions, but to have something written down. It's hard for a student to, number one, to process it at first, for English learners especially. But then later in the day, if they're thinking back through any kind of task they need to complete, if they don't have it written down, they do not have a reference point and just time to process words or look words up and try to make sure they know what they're supposed to do. So clear directions are important. Graphic organizers and visual aids are always great for students to help them access, again, what the content is. Sentence starters. Sometimes we ask students questions. We want them to pull words from the air to give answers. If we provide them a starting point for their answer, like, I think that, it seems to me, the story says, the text tells me, I wonder about, any kind of sentence starter really helps them get started in their thought process. Because for our English learners, it may be that they understand the content, but they don't have the words to express it. So giving them a starting point is really a catalyst for sharing what is in their head. It's also okay to let them use their native language at first. Let them get down on paper what they understand about something in their native language, and then give them more time to get that into English. And it may not be in the same format, or they may be able to tell you orally in English what they have learned, but it gives them a multi-step part if we're really accessing their content. And then with all lessons, it's really important to make sure we focus on critical vocabulary so that we open the door to whatever the content is. And that, again, critical for all students. If they don't know the words, they can't understand what the content is trying to teach them. And those are things that you all do all the time, but just to validate that those are really good instructional practices. When we award grades to EL students, our end goal is that they receive the grade that they earn in the content area, provided that appropriate and necessary modifications have been established to ensure that they have equal access to the content and can demonstrate mastery of the subject matter. It may be that how they demonstrate that knowledge looks different from other students in the class. It may be through a graphic organizer. It may be through a cartoon strip that they draw to show the process of a story. It may be that they can orally share what they've learned, but they're not ready to write a paragraph yet. So there are a lot of different ways that we express that output. Sometimes we have students, especially with our newcomer students, where it is beneficial to them to put them on an SU grading system to take, number one, some of the pressure off. So as long as they're making progress and demonstrating attempts at work, that they're not counted off negatively for things that they can't do yet. We need to give them time to grow and learn and develop their English proficiency in order to truly understand what they understand about the content. So an EL staff member, if we deem that a student would benefit from an SU grading system, EL staff will talk to you about that. And it's not all or nothing. So a student may get an SU grade in social studies, which is very language-based and can be very challenging for an English learner, but they may be fine in math. So it may be social studies is an SU grade, math is a regular grade. So it's it's based solely on students' abilities and what is best for them long-term. Although we try to keep SU as short-term as possible, we really want them to be receiving grades that they earn. I mentioned Elevation earlier. This is our platform where we house all of our English learner data. By law, once an English learner meets the exit criteria for Oklahoma, we have to monitor their progress in the classroom for 4 academic years. So 3 times a year, forms are sent out to teachers of English learners, and we ask that you fill it. It's pretty short. Ask that you fill it out, and it's a way for us to keep track of how they're doing in the classroom. So if you get an email from Elevation, do not delete it. There's something that is needed in there. Also, this is where you can access, like I said, a dashboard that shows your English learners and their data and recommendations for how you can support them in the classroom. If you ever have a question about Elevation, you cannot get logged in, things like that, please contact your EL staff member at your site, and we will make sure that you get the access that you need. For any questions that you have for an English learner, please reach out to your site EL teacher. These are people who are a great resource for you, who have lots of knowledge about what we can do to support our English learners, and can also just provide information about a student's background that kind of gives us some understanding of where they've been, where they are, and where we want them to go. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you have a wonderful start to the school year.